Every single card in my Jodah deck is legendary, and I really mean every single card. I don't have Sol Ring in here, every single land is legendary, it is 101 legendary cards. And yes, I said 101 because I'm using Jegentha as the companion. Of course, technically she starts in the sideboard and isn't part of the deck, but whatever. Now, I've been wanting to make an all-legendary deck for a long time, but one of the biggest challenges is that there are only around 70 usable legendary lands in total, and not even 40 which can reliably produce colored mana. And almost none of them produce more than one color of mana. Thus, I've always known that this would have to be a 5-color deck in order to have enough legendary lands to even play, but also because the lands provide pretty terrible color fixing, I knew I'd need to run Jegentha as the companion. Now, you might be asking, why are you making all of the cards legendary? Isn't that an unnecessary restriction? Wouldn't the deck be better if you put in reliable ramp and color fixing, or even just some basics? Well, if you've seen my videos, you'll know I love playing highly synergistic battlecruiser magic. Going all in on legendaries means that I generate a lot of value and I have a deck that requires less mental effort to play. For example, if I have a card like Shannon out, which draws me cards when I play legendary lands or spells, I don't have to think about which cards in my hand will trigger Shannon's ability. Instead, I just get to windmill slam my cards onto the table, knowing each one I play draws me a card. This general concept applies to a lot of other cards in the deck as well, like Yoshimaru, Arbaz, and Basim, and of course, the commander itself. When Jodah is in play, I don't have to think about whether I cast a non-legendary spell which doesn't trigger his ability, or instead cast a legendary spell to get value. I just want every card in my deck to trigger his ability and generate value for me. Plus, running only legendaries means I save time with the cascade mechanic since I don't have to filter through as many cards. Now, a lot of people when they play Jodah like to make really big plays. Their idea of a good Jodah deck is for Avacyn to cascade into Gisela, or for Toxrill to cascade into Atraxa. For me personally, since Jodah already costs 5 mana and I don't have access to the traditional ramp spells, I decided to focus on a lower mana curve for this deck with the idea that once Jodah comes down, he'll buff the utility creatures I played leading up to him. My first priority for those utility creatures is ramp and color fixing. So I've got Bugenhagen, I've got Gwenna and Inga and Essica, among others. I even got Captain Lannery Storm and Regavan, as the ability to make a treasure token which can generate any color of mana is pretty valuable. I'm even running Ramos in this deck, which can function a lot like Jegentha, and even Kibo has a role in this deck because I'm so desperate for color fixing and his ability to remove artifacts is somewhat useful. Jensen is in this deck as well, as his ability to filter mana is yet another Jegentha-like ability which can help me produce the mana I need for Jodah. And most recently I added in the Warring Triad because any colorless legendary card which can produce colored mana is going to be an auto include in this deck. I've also got some of these mana dork legendaries like Vruda, Radha, Galrana, Katilda, and Marwyn. Since these only produce the same color of mana that they cost, they don't help with color fixing, but they do provide ramp, which is just generally good in EDH and also useful if I need to spend the 8 mana it costs to put Jegentha into my hand and cast her. The next priority for creatures is effects which protect my commander and Jegentha. Both Jodah and Jegentha cost a lot of mana, so I want to keep them safe. Without access to cards like Teferi's Protection, Fierce Guardianship, Heroic Intervention, and Flawless Maneuver, I'm instead running cards like Boromir, Hajar, Pippin, Guardian of the Citadel, Essior, and Shalai. These can come down before either Jegentha or Jodah do, and provide that increased protection which is so important in this deck. If you've seen my deck building discipline video, you'll know I use these cards as an example of how you can find on-theme alternatives to commander staples, and that these on-theme alternatives can help you develop more value and synergy than just generically good cards would. To me, this is a lot of the point of playing casual battlecruiser magic, and if you're curious to learn more, I recommend watching that video. The priority after the protection effects is cards which give me that ticket to Legendary Value Town. So like I mentioned before, that's cards like Yoshi and Arbaz and Basim and Shanid. But also I've got Reki and Joyra to draw me cards off casting legendaries. And lastly, I've got Rona, which is a powerful way to filter through my deck quickly and early in the game and help me build out a better opening hand. Both Sisseys are also valuable in this deck since Captain Sissay can tutor for any card in the deck, and Sissay Weatherlight Captain can tutor for every single card except my one sorcery, Urza's Ruinous Blast. Kethis is in here as well, as he's just another card that probably belongs in any legendary themed deck which has the necessary colors. I've also got cards which benefit from the high creature count, like Chulane and Animar. In fact, cards like this, as well as Inga and Essica, make me tempted to take this deck one step further and make all of the non-land cards creatures, which is what I used to do with my Essica EDH deck. For artifacts, of course, I can't run Sol Ring, but I do have Mox Amber. I've also got Phial of Galadriel in here because it's colorless and can tap for any color. I run Chromatic Orrery and Timeless Lotus. These are additionally important for their color fixing effects and operating as another Jegentha. Those are also two of the only high mana value cards in this deck. I know a lot of people want to play Jodah and cast high CMC cards, which cascade into other high CMC cards, but what I'm doing with this deck is trying to play a bunch of low mana value creatures before Jodah comes down, and then once he comes out, all those low mana value legendary creatures will get buffed and become viable threats. Because that is the main win con in this deck, I also run Heroes Podium. The second ability can be used reliably, but really I'm just running this card for its first effect since that makes it function like a backup commander. I've mentioned I have Rona in this deck to help filter through it, and similarly I'm running Matzalanti, the Great Door, because having a colorless card which provides deck filtering is really useful if my starting hand has poor color fixing and I need to dig through my deck to try to find a fix for it. Lastly, I'm running the One Ring. This plus Gaia's Cradle are the two game changers which are in this deck. I'm running the One Ring because the fact it's colorless and can draw me cards saves my bacon when I have a poor opening hand, and for Gaia's Cradle I'm just running it because it's legendary and produces green mana. I know both of these are two of the more busted game changers, but I decide I need to run them to make this deck work. I'm also running 3 enchantments. Annie joins up, Vraska joins up, and Growing Rites of Iklamok. Rites is in here to help me dig for lands. Annie is in here since it's super busted with all the legendary creature triggers I have, including Jodah's own Cascade ability. And Vraska is in here because it can be a good way to draw me cards early in the game. For lands, I only had around 75 I could choose from, and of those 75, quite a few either produce only generic colorless mana or they don't produce mana at all. So I put in almost every single legendary land that produces at least one colored mana, even ones like Nykthos and Three Tree City that are probably going to be really bad in this deck, but beggars can't be choosers, and the fact they can produce colored mana means I need to run them. One thing I love about building decks which have restrictions is that it forces me to play some really stupid cards I normally wouldn't consider. For example, with Teleria, I know that someday I will randomly play against a banding deck, and being able to hate that deck out is going to be hilarious. One of my favorite things in EDH, in fact, is hearing my opponent say, "Why would you even run that card?" out of frustration that some stupid card I run ruins their strategy. Lands like Hammerheim and Urborg are similar, except they're more likely to be useful, and these are also pretty hilarious because people normally don't pay that much attention to lands, and they are always surprised when their Shield Dread loses Swamp Walk, or their Thali and Gitrog lose First Strike, and so their First Strike Death Touch combo fails. I'm not going to mention all the rest of the lands, as really I just shoved in almost every single land I could play when following this theme, and so instead I want to move on to mulliganing. When mulliganing this deck, because the color fixing is such a challenge, it's important to really try to find an opening hand that lets you cast something in the first few turns of the game. Of course, if your opening hand has green mana and a green ramp card like Bugenhagen, that's an incredible opening start. But normally the odds are not in our favor. So instead, you just have to be willing to keep any opening hand which has some sort of early play. So that could just mean you have blue mana and cast Rona, and then you use that Rona to start filtering through your deck early on. Or it could mean you have only colorless lands, but you have Phial of Galadriel. Or just a red mana with Regavan can also be a great start, so you can get those treasure tokens. Now, sometimes you'll get really screwed, and even after mulliganing down to 6, you won't have any cards you can play with the mana you have. That's also fine. That's where Jegentha becomes key. And basically all we need to do is get to 5 mana and have one of those be red or green. Ideally, we want to avoid opening hands where all we do is wait until turn 5 when we can cast Jegentha, but occasionally that just can't be avoided in this deck. Thankfully, because Wizards prints legendaries every single set, it's only going to be a matter of time before I get more options for legendary lands and even mana dorks and mana rocks. So over time, this deck is going to become more reliable as I get to shift the mana base more towards green mana, or Wizards gives me some awesome new colorless legendary mana rocks. Thanks for watching, and if you made it this far, like, comment, and subscribe, and of course, let me know in the comments if I missed anything.